Okay, so if we're here, we'll get started. The meeting of the Gresham Budget Committee will now come to order. The time is now 6:06. Let's begin with a roll call of the committee members and staff in attendance. And I'd like to call on Sharon Monahan, Budget and Finance Director, to lead us through that roll call.
Thanks, Chair Allen. And I'm going to go through the list alphabetical by last name of the committee members first, which conveniently starts with you, Chair Allen. And we've heard you're here and your audio works, so that's great. Jan Baker.
Here.
Dina Danucci.
Here.
Dave Dyke.
Here.
Janine Gladfelter.
Here.
And next up is Jerry Hinton. I don't see him yet, but we'll circle back. Vincent Jones Dixon. Don't see him yet either. Claire Leiter.
Here.
And Nick McWilliams.
Here.
And Councilor Morales let us know he would not be able to be here this evening. Councilor Hinton, I see you here. You're here. You may want to redo your name on the screen show because you're under disguise at the moment.
Gotcha.
And Councilor Piazza.
I'm here twice, I guess.
Because you wanted to be here so much. It's so much fun. Mike Schultz.
Here.
Mayor Travis Stovall.
I'm here once.
And Teresa Shirky.
I'm here as well.
And so that gets through the roll call for the committee members. Before I start on the staff roll call, I want to make one announcement, which is you might notice an important person missing from this screen at the moment. Our city manager, Nina Vetter, has been traveling back from a local government conference and has experienced a series of delayed flights today, which is preventing her from being with us tonight. So our assistant manager, Elizabeth Coffey, is going to be covering the budget message part of the presentation tonight. Nina wanted to be sure that we convey to her appreciation for your time tonight and for your service throughout the year overseeing the city's budget, which is a critical piece of our financial health. So many thanks on her behalf, and I also echo her sentiment, but she will not be with us here this evening. For continuing on staff roll call then, Assistant City Manager Elizabeth Coffey.
Here.
Deputy City Manager Corey Falls.
Here.
City Attorney Kevin McConnell.
Here.
Assistant City Manager Eric Schmidt.
Here.
And Assistant City Manager Steve Fancher.
Here.
And Elizabeth McCann, Budget Manager.
Good evening.
And we have Christina Ott serving as our recording secretary tonight, and a variety of other staff folks that are in the background helping us with the meeting procedures and making sure that we have all the mechanics working. So, and I'm Sharon Monahan, Budget and Finance Director for the city. And with that, turn it back over to Chair Allen.
Okay, our next item is a review of the agenda, ground rules, and meeting protocol. Sharon Monahan will present this information.
Thanks, Chair. And so just to go over briefly what we are doing this evening, we will be electing officers for the Budget Committee. We will be presenting the budget message and an overview to you. We'll be holding the state shared revenue hearing, accepting public comment if there is any, and having the initial committee discussion. The documents and other materials will be posted online later tonight, and printed copies will be provided to the committee members tomorrow. That gives you a week to read and review before we come back next Thursday for further discussion. At that time, there will be another opportunity for public comment, and you'll have a chance to discuss and approve the budget that evening. If additional discussion is needed, we do have the potential third date set aside on folks' calendars. For ground rules, those are similar to what we've seen in prior years. The meetings are to end by 9 p.m. unless the committee agrees to continue discussion beyond that time. The normal timelines regarding public comments have been included, And the approval action should be for the budget as a whole rather than individual parts on a piecemeal basis. The most important ground rule, though, is to remember that the meeting tonight at the end needs to be recessed, not adjourned. That's important for us to comply with Oregon budget law noticing requirements. We want to make sure that we're just recessing until the meeting next week. One other reminder, as there is a levy measure on the May ballot, as staff, we do need to adhere to election law restrictions. So our city attorney will chime in to provide any additional advice or guidance if needed along the way. For other protocols, we ask that you try to use the raise hand feature and also the thumbs up feature if possible. If you can, that does make it a little easier to find you on the screen. When it comes time for especially to count votes, it does take a little bit of time to kind of find everybody, especially if you happen to turn your camera off for any reason, then you reshuffle on the screen and it takes us a little bit of time to hunt everybody down and see where they went. That concludes the main things that I wanted to make sure were covered ahead of time. If anybody has any questions, be happy to answer them.
Are there any questions or discussion on the information that was presented?
And I will say for the record, I see Councilor Jones-Dixon has arrived as well.
Then the next order of business is to elect a chair and vice chair of the Budget Committee. Please raise your hand if you would like to make a nomination for the Budget Committee chair. Dave?
I have not discussed this with anybody, but Claire, would you be interested in being nominated? Open to that, I guess.
I would be open to that.
Perfect. Chair Ellen, I'd nominate Claire Leiter.
I'll second that nomination. This is Teresa. I didn't raise my hand, sorry.
Chair Allen.
Yes.
If I can chime in, that there's nothing specifically wrong with seconding a nomination, but it is not required to second a nomination.
My apologies.
Okay, so we have a nomination for Claire. Any other nominations? So we have a nomination for Claire Leiter to be Budget Committee Chair. All those in favor, raise your hand.
And I think I'm seeing everybody. So I think we're good. Thank you.
All right, thank you, everybody. Are there any nominations for vice chair? Jan, do you have a nomination?
My mind is just all of a sudden gone totally blank. So just give me a second and I will. I nominate Mike Schultz.
Okay, there's a nomination for Mike Schultz. Anyone else like to present a nomination at this time? All right, seeing none, I will go ahead and state that we do have a nomination for Mike Schultz to be Budget Committee Vice Chair. All those in favor, please raise your hand. You know, I didn't even ask Mike if he wanted this. I just realized. But I do see that doesn't say to ask that either. So, Mike, I assume that you will accept the nomination because everybody wants you to be here that I see. Any opposed? Please raise your hand at this time.
And be sure to take your hand down if you were voting before.
Yep, on it. Sorry.
All right. I do see that Mike Schultz has been selected as the new vice chair. Thank you. I'm not even sure we let you unmute, so I appreciate that. All right, so for public testimony, community members who wish to speak or provide written comments were invited to sign up 24 hours prior to tonight's meeting with the recording secretary. When we get to the appropriate item on the agenda, any community members who signed up to speak will be called on and you will be brought to the panel to speak. Please state your name for the record and observe the time limit of 3 minutes. Also, please be aware that there are 2 distinct comment periods. The first will be for the state shared revenue hearing, and the second will be for the proposed budget overall. Right, moving on to item number 5, budget message and overview. At this time, we will have
Elizabeth Coffey will be starting.
I think that's me.
Okay, I figured as much. So Miss Elizabeth Coffey will now begin the presentation of the budget message. Thank you.
All right, thank you, Chair Leiter, and good evening, members of the Budget Committee. I'm Elizabeth Coffey, the Assistant City Manager for the Central Services area, and tonight I'm pleased to present to you the City Manager's budget message on behalf of our City Manager, Nina Vetter, who I know is very disappointed that she could not be here today. So over the past few years, the city has been on an important journey to directly tackle the challenges that we face in our difficult financial situation. These challenges are a direct result of an inequitable property tax system that limits Gresham's rate to one of the lowest in the state and severely hampers our ability to fund our services. Despite these challenges, we are tremendously optimistic about Gresham's future and our ability to rise above these issues to provide excellent service to this community. And so the theme of our budget this coming year is taking flight. We'll take flight through 3 tactics: implementing our financial roadmap, implementing our strategic plan, and by improving transparency. For more than a year and through difficult but necessary work and hard conversations, our City Council adopted the financial roadmap, which is a 3-year plan to fund a full-service city organization with the resources needed to deliver exceptional community services and implement our strategic plan. The focus is on our general fund, which funds critical public safety and livability services, our Parks Department, and economic development functions. The goal is to narrow the gap between expenses and revenue with a mix of revenue tools as well as critical financial stability work. We are embarking upon year 1 of the financial roadmap in this coming fiscal year in our proposed budget. There are 2 revenue tools in this year's budget. One is the Gresham Safety Levy and as well as a fee. We will also be undertaking financial stability work. We'll be exploring long-term parks and recreation funding options. We will also be looking into naming rights for city facilities as a way to potentially provide revenue. And we will be beginning our assessment of capital needs and long-term funding alternatives. The second tactic that we're using to take flight is our strategic plan. In 2022, Council approved the city's strategic plan. For the first time in recent history, the City of Gresham has a unifying mission, vision, guiding principles and priorities that reflect input and ideas from across the community as well as city staff. Our strategic plan also includes success measures that will help our staff, council, and the community better understand how the city is or is not meeting its goals and where we need to adjust our work to be successful. There are 5 strategic plan priorities, which you see here on the screen: financial sustainability, community safety, thriving economy, housing for all, and community vibrancy. The third tactic that we are using to take flight is to work on improving transparency. Our city manager and our council approach leadership with openness and honesty. We know that building trust with our community is critical to our success because only by working together can we accomplish our goals. To that end, we have a number of goals in the coming year that focus on transparency, including developing a budget transparency tool that allows residents accessible access to how funds are spent. While all of our budget documents are currently posted online and available to all, we recognize that most residents do not want to comb through the 100+ pages that you all will be receiving later tonight. So we will be finding ways to present this in a more digestible manner. After council adopted our strategic plan, staff began working on an action plan that outlines what steps we are going to take, who will take them, and in what timeline. And this is also available on our website to provide more insight into what we are working on. We are also in the process of fine-tuning our success and performance measures, and we will be developing a performance dashboard that will allow the community to visually see how we're performing. Our final transparency project that we're working on is a police dashboard. We are close to completion of the strategic plan action item, which will provide the public with key information about police data, including demographics and use of force deployment. Now I'll transition into talking about a few key details that you'll see in the proposed fiscal year 2023 and 2024 budget later this evening. My colleagues on the executive team will be providing you with details of specific areas within each of our service areas, but I'm going to highlight a few key operational items that we're focusing on next fiscal year. One is technology needs. We have 2 projects in the proposed budget that are funded by IT capital funds. These, one is a new timekeeping solution to be more efficient, which includes a limited term employee to support that project and ensure that our payroll continues to operate smoothly. And the second is a critical Microsoft upgrade that will allow for data reporting and collaboration. As well, we will be proposing funding a business systems analyst through our Department of Environmental Services that will help them with critical and changing technology needs, as they are one of our largest departments. Another key operational item in our budget is a focus on our fire promotional process. We have devoted some funds so that we can conduct external testing with an external resource to assist with fair and an equitable promotional process. Finally, like last year, the city will defer the contribution from the general fund to the equipment replacement fund to ensure that we can continue to fund critical staffing needs. At the end of each year, the city typically ends up with some unspent funds from turnover and changing circumstances. So we do expect that we will still be able to make this contribution by the end of the coming fiscal year, as we were able to do this year. So I'd like to just say on Nina's behalf, again, thank you to our council, to this budget committee, to our budget staff team, and to all of our leadership and staff that continue to manage within limited budgets while they provide service to this community. I look forward to taking flight with all of you over the next year. That concludes the city manager's budget message. And now I'll be turning it over to our deputy city manager, Corey Falls.
Thank you, Elizabeth, and good evening, Chair Leiter and committee members. My name is Corey Falls, Deputy City Manager for the City of Gresham. I'll be talking about the city manager's office tonight and the department overview. Our city manager's office encompasses our city recorder, administrative assistants, government relations, neighborhood services, council support. It also has our parks, recreation, and youth services. Within our city manager's office, it is budgeted for 14 employees. These funds come from internal service charges, administrative service fees, not fees, administrative services, and our designated purpose. And our major initiatives and focus areas in the city manager's office for this budget year includes our continued work in local, regional, state, and federal advocacy. To continue to work on our city strategic plan, our performance management, and our innovative programs. We also want to lead and manage the city's neighborhood association and council citizen advisory committees programs, and provide council support and manage the city's records program. The strategic plan priorities for the city manager's office include to put in place a plan to share more financial information with the community as part of our efforts to be more transparent, celebrate city accomplishments while communicating the cost to keep basic services, explore creative ways to supply community safety that maintain core service levels, adapt to community needs and public safety best practices, develop and start an equitable poverty reduction and prevention plan to address the root causes of poverty and improve overall community wealth, and promote connection for community members, both social and physical, to meet everyone's needs regardless of physical ability, language, digital access, etc. Next is our function of parks, recreation, and youth services. One thing I love about the community of Gresham is Gresham Parks maintains over 314 acres of developed active parks at 54 sites, 8 miles of trails, and is the community's steward for over 800 acres of natural areas. This area is budgeted staffing of 17 employees. The funds are general fund. The general fund for this function is a little over $5.2 million. There's also designated purpose funds at over 2.2 million. And then our capital improvement program from parks of 17 million. The major initiatives and focus areas for our parks, recreation, and youth services in this upcoming budget year is to expand recreational offerings for youth and adults, continue progress on parks capital projects, including our Graydon Community Sports Park, our ARPA-funded upgrades, and the Metro Local Share eligible projects. We also want to continue developing the city's youth services and youth violence prevention programs. And lastly, we want to update the city's 2009 Parks, Recreation, Trail, and Natural Area Master Plan. Finally, our strategic plan priorities for our parks, recreation, and youth services are to improve livability and increase the community's sense of safety and security, enhance safety around the city streets, parks, neighborhoods, and transportation networks, support and increase a mix of recreational arts and cultural programming for youth and adults to foster community well-being for everyone, and maintain the quality of Gresham's natural resources and increase public access to parks and natural areas for recreation and enjoyment. Thank you. I will now turn it over to City Attorney McConnell.
Thank you, Chair Leiter and members of the Budget Committee. My name is Kevin McConnell, and I serve as the City Attorney for the City of Gresham. The City Attorney's Office is comprised of 10 full-time employees and 1 limited-term employee. That limited-term employee is Jane Leo, who serves as the Project Manager for the Charter Review Committee. Our funding request for this fiscal year is as follows. For the Legal Services Fund, $1,677,714. And for the Workers' Comprehensive Liability Management Fund, $7,102,307. In addition to providing legal advice to the council and city staff, enforcing the city codes, and representing the city's interests in court and before administrative bodies, this fiscal year, the City Attorney's Office will focus on assisting the council review the charter review committee's final report and its recommended charter changes, as well as prepare ballot titles and explanatory statements for recommendations forwarded to the ballot by the council, as well as assist the council in its review of the feasibility in reestablishing a city municipal court. Thank you. And Sharon, I am unclear on who I need to turn it over to.
It's back to me.
Back to Corey. Thank you very
Yes.
much.
Thank you, and I'm back. So thank you, Chair Leiter and committee members. Corey Falls again, Deputy City Manager. I'm going to go over the functions that I oversee as the Deputy City Manager. That includes police, fire, community livability, emergency management, and diversity, equity, and inclusion. Leading off with the police department, there's a budgeted staff of 169.40 employees. In this year's budget, you'll see 9 additional employees. This is a general fund within the city, and also funded by local option levy that we'll be asking for, grants and donations. The general fund for the police department is $44,838,199. We get approved for the local option levy, that'll bring in another $7,090,069. And there's designated purpose funds of $1.296 million. The strategic plan priorities and major initiatives in the police department are, this is part of our strategic plan, also the citywide strategic plan, is to continue to develop a public safety relationship with the community to build rapport and trust. And we say continue because we're already doing some of that work. Our police chief is working on implementing a community coalition group and a chief's advisory group to help build trust and relationships within our community. And he's also set up a professional standards unit within our police department. The other priority in this year's budget for the police department is to implement the police department's strategic plan. That was work that they completed after the Barry Dunn report and the 44 recommendations that came out of that. And that will coincide within the strategic plan to start moving forward on those recommendations in the police department's strategic plan. Next up is our fire department, which consists of 131.15 employees. There'll be 14 new positions in this year's budget. This is also a general fund funded budget area, and we'll also have funds from the local option levy if that passes, grants and donations. The general fund for fire is $31,973,508. And if we do get the local option levy passed, that'll add an additional $5.469 million. There's also funding from facilities and fleet management at $270,000 and designated purpose funding as well. The strategic plan priorities within our fire department in this upcoming budget year include to begin acting on the recommendations from the standards of cover review. We just had a standards of cover review that analyzed our fire department and services. They came out with some recommendations that we would like to move forward on. Our priorities would be adding a rescue for our response and implementing our mobile integrated health program. Within the fire department, we also want to align the fire department's strategic plan with the priorities of the standards of cover report that we have completed for us. Next is community livability. This has a budgeted staff of 13.3 employees. 1 employee will be added in this year's budget. This is another general fund. And also, if the local option levy passed, funds will go to community livability. And it also is funded by internal service charges, grants, and intergovernment agreements. The general fund for community livability is $1.655 million. The local option levy, $227,000. If that passed, those funds would go to support this community livability, and the designated purpose fund of $2.493 million. The strategic plan priorities and major initiatives for community livability, which encompasses our code compliance, our homeless services, our mediation. Our first is to improve livability and increase the community's sense of safety and security, and to provide resources to those experiencing homeless or housing insecurity through collaboration and partnerships with other government agencies, nonprofits, and the private sector. And a couple action items of how we want to get there is, number one, we want to identify and advocate for direct resources to the city to assist people who are experiencing homelessness or housing insecurity through collaboration with regional and state partners. Number two, we want to secure ongoing funds for a program to provide housing and a time certain rent-free period for those experiencing homelessness. And lastly, collaborate with nonprofit homeless service providers operating in Gresham to enhance communication and partnership. Moving on to emergency management, this is staffed by our emergency manager. The budgeted funds is generated through internal service charges and grants, and our designated purpose is $285,948. Within our emergency management function, our strategic plan priority and major initiatives include strengthening the city's ability to withstand natural disasters and deal with climate change and water resources. We also want to develop and carry out plans to respond to and recover from future threats and challenges. And the other initiative is to support the adoption of our natural hazard mitigation plan and the implementation of that plan, because that can serve as a revenue tool for our community and our city to leverage federal funding. Lastly, I want to speak on behalf of our diversity, equity, and inclusion program. That's budgeted one position, which is our diversity, equity, and inclusion manager. This funding is within the city manager's office. The strategic plan priorities and major initiatives within our diversity, equity, and inclusion function include developing an implementation of the equity lens tool and procedures. And think of an equity lens tool as a tool guide to help with decision making when it comes to making decisions around diversity, equity, and inclusion, both internally and externally. We also want to develop and implement a DEI level 2.1 training. Essentially, we've had a lot of employees and our committee members go through an initial level training, and this would be that next second tier training that includes a cohort model organizational champions. We also want to continue our annual Trailient all staff training. Our Trailient training is just our internal HR training that we continue to do, and we will continue that. We want to continue the organization-wide knowledge and understanding of the You Belong. That's been a big part of our diversity, equity, and inclusion work, is training on belonging within our organization and within our community. And in our continued work on our 6 critical words we have identified as equity, inclusion, diversity, underserved, intersectionality, and microaggressions. And lastly, within this function, we want to continue our collaboration with our human resources on staff leadership and our diversity, equity, and inclusion competencies and improvement of our policies. Thank you.
Thank you. Excuse me. Thank you, Corey. Good evening, Chair and Budget Committee members, and hope you're all doing well. My name is Eric Schmidt, and I am one of the Assistant City Managers covering the portfolio of departments and services under my purview, which we refer to as Community and Economic Development. Those functional budgetary areas include urban renewal, urban design and planning, and economic development and housing services. First up is urban renewal. Has a budgeted staffing of 5.15 positions, which does include a proposed new position or additional position from current fiscal year. In terms of budget and funding, funding is provided by the GRDC and has 2 components. We have urban renewal support at just about $2.3 million, and the urban renewal CIP, capital improvement program, at approximately $6.9 million. As you probably know, the budget schedule that we have, urban renewal happens twice. We have it in the city process that happens tonight, April 27th and May 4th if needed. And then the GRDC specific budget hearing is scheduled for May 9th at 6 p.m. In terms of strategic plan priorities, urban renewal really touches almost all of them. And going through them just briefly, for Housing for All, certainly promoting and supporting housing development that's affordable to the Gresham community. is important. Part of that includes completion of the Aviva project, which is the last building in downtown Rockwood. That project includes workforce housing as well as ground floor retail. Also continued development and hopefully a development agreement formalized with what we refer to now as Rockwood B188, which is the former Sunrise Center and Asia Kitchen, includes those properties. In terms of community safety, Urban Renewal will work certainly with other service areas to support the climate action plan implementation, as well as the transportation system plan. Thriving economy, we also look to lay the groundwork for economic opportunity and mobility, certainly supporting a lot of our long-range planning efforts, and more specifically for the urban renewal area is looking at a potential storefront improvement grant, and we will bring a conversation to that to the GRDC here in the coming months. Community vibrancy. Sorry, I lost my screen. Oh,
Elizabeth, it looks like your screen is moved to something else. Thank you.
Thank you. Well, okay, now I got. Okay, we're back. And then last thing in terms of community vibrancy, a lot of the work will center around the community investment framework, which is really a list of the priority projects for the remaining 6 years of the Urban Renewal District. Next up is urban design and planning, which includes 17.8 in positions, which is no change from current fiscal year. Funding is generated by permit fees, general fund, and also grants. In terms of UDP, urban design and planning, we have approximately $4.2 million, with also $85,000 as part of the designated purpose fund. Likewise, urban design and planning covers many of the strategic plan priorities and major initiatives around housing for all. And a lot of that is going to be centered around the finalization and implementation of the housing production strategy that's set to come before council next month. In terms of community safety, also supporting the climate action plan, the transportation system plan. There's a lot of work with that. That certainly will take a bulk of transportation over the next fiscal year. Thriving economy, again, a lot of that ties into the long range work that our comprehensive planning folks work on to help support future development. Specifically, a couple of projects that we are working on is developing a project plan to update the city's comprehensive plan and development code with the idea around incentivizing and supporting future development, reflecting current trends and needs around flexibility, process improvements, and ease of use. And also staff is working with Echo Northwest to complete a refresh of the Pleasant Valley concept plan, looking at zoning opportunities, both around housing, commercial needs, as the plan was approximately about 22 years old now. And lastly, on community vibrancy, continuing to work around One Gresham, leveraging the investments around our core regional centers, completing and implementing the conceptual plan for the civic neighborhood. Also certainly supporting the work around the new East County Library that will be breaking ground in the summer of this year. And we also will be initiating a number of comprehensive planning projects, including a well-needed tree code update. So we look forward to that conversation with council beginning in June. Lastly is economic development and housing services. Overall, we have 39.65 positions, which is a reduction of 0.5 position from current fiscal year. For budget and funding, it's generated by internal service charges, permits, fees, intergovernmental agreements, and grants. With the general fund at approximately 1.6 million, the building division and permit center at approximately 5.5 million, the designated purpose fund being the largest at approximately 18.3 million, which really covers the bulk of that, includes the funding that we have as part of the Metro Housing Bond and our enterprise zone within economic development. And also rental housing inspections at approximately 1.3 million. And lastly is our federal block grant, CDBG and home, our federal programs at approximately 4.2 million. This budgetary fund is really comprised of two functional areas, or kind of two departments, let's say. We've got economic and development services, and then we have housing services, but they are combined budgetarily into one. Splitting them up just a little bit, economic and development services, a number of efforts that they are going to be working on over the next year around supporting thriving economy, community vibrancy, and community safety, focusing a lot on connecting commercial and retail developers and brokers with a lot of opportunity sites that we have in Gresham. We have a number of active conversations, and as the council knows, and I think the budget committee may know, ongoing work with the civic neighborhood, downtown. We have a lot of interest and a lot of conversations that we are working through right now. Continue to advocate at the state level, legislatively, around workforce development, ways that we are supporting our industrial sector and similar programs. We're looking to make some different connections and new connections between our Mountain View Community College and our K through 12 districts, and also employers. Really talks about the real future of workforce development going into the middle school and elementary school level. And also developing relationships with our community-based organizations, working with our BIPOC-owned businesses, creating pathways for better communications and resource sharing as we go forward. And also supporting the work of the One Gresham initiatives, again, leveraging the community investments, and then also supporting our climate action plan work as we go forward. And lastly, for housing services administers the annual HUD, federal CDBG and home funding to meet the needs of community members. So that will be coming before council here next month, or actually early June. And we are working through the active RFP, the request for proposals for the remaining Metro Affordable Housing Bond funding, and look forward to bringing that conversation to council for project endorsement also in June of this year. We're continuing to develop relationships with local service providers, and also monitoring our potential state resources around development of affordable housing. Certainly our rental housing program, now in its approximately 15th year, is still very busy, and a lot of work around rental housing and helping support that efforts. And then also exploring the extension and potential expansion of an intergovernmental agreement we have with Home Forward. And with that, I will transition this over to Steve Fancher.
Thanks, Eric. Good evening, everyone. Steve Fancher, Assistant City Manager with responsibility over environmental services, which we'll get into what that means in a second. It also includes the city's fleet and facilities service areas. Starting with water, what you see here is an increase in 1 FTE from last year, and this is partially due to the expansion of our groundwater system. It's a inspection position to ensure that system remains safe. Funding for the water utility is generated primarily through water utility rates, but also system development charges and grants. And you see the operating budget there in the capital improvement program 5-year proposed budget as well. Some of our strategic plan priorities and major initiatives include design and construction of the joint groundwater supply system in partnership with Rockwood Water PUD to provide an independent water supply for Gresham customers by 2026. This partnership is formalized as the Cascade Groundwater Alliance, and the 2023-2024 period is a time of intense coordination among the partners, and a number of agreements will be hammered out in that time. Stepping back real quick, go ahead, keep going. Sorry, I got off my notes a little bit. So with the wastewater utility, you see here reflected an increase of 1 employee from last year, and this is an addition of a public utility worker to help keep up with the additional maintenance of new systems that have been added as development occurs. Funding for wastewater is generated by wastewater utility rates primarily, but also system development charges and grants. You see the operating budget proposed in the 5-year capital improvement. The wastewater program provides planning, design, and operation and maintenance, capital improvement of the city's wastewater collection and treatment facilities. The treatment plant serves over 119,000 customers within Gresham, Wood Village, Fairview, and portions of East Portland. The plant treats about 13 million gallons of wastewater daily and is net zero in that it produces as much energy as it uses. Some of the key issues and projects for this coming fiscal year include treatment plant upgrades to comply with the city's environmental permits. And this includes design and construction of ammonia treatment facilities in a secondary clarifier in partnership with Microchip Corporation. Go ahead. The stormwater utility. This reflects an increase in 3 employees. This is a small vegetation management team to help maintain the growing green infrastructure that we have to treat stormwater runoff in compliance with our permit with the state. Funding is generated by stormwater utility rates, system development charges, and grants. You see the operating proposed budget, the CIP shown there. The watershed program provides flood protection through continual improvement and maintenance of the city's stormwater system. And we work to monitor and improve water quality and habitat of 75 miles of streams and 674 acres of riparian corridors to meet state and federal requirements. Some of the key issues for this coming fiscal year include continued development of a condition assessment program to determine our storm system condition, including detailed TV inspection program of our high priority pipe areas to prevent flooding. Also, I mentioned green infrastructure because what we've seen, the trend over the years, is that about half of our infrastructure now for stormwater, as far as maintenance goes, is vegetated. It's green, it's not underground, it's not pipes. So we are required by our state permit to continue to build that green infrastructure system out to prevent pollution of our waterways. Go ahead and go to the next. Transportation, the proposed budget reflects a reduction of 2 employees from last year, and this is primarily due to 2 limited term positions that we had to do a traffic signal mast arm replacement project that's now complete. So those positions can be removed from the budget. Funding for transportation is quite different than the water utilities, and that majority of the funding is coming from the state. It's the state gas tax and vehicle registration fees. We also have system development charges and grants. We have a good chunk of revenue from utility license fees from our own utilities and other utilities that are in the streets like PGE and Northwest Natural. You see the proposed operating budget, streetlight budget, and footpaths, and transportation capital improvement program budget. Some of the strategic plan priorities, key projects. This is the last year coming up of the Hitting the Streets local street reconstruction program, a big milestone for us to complete that project, basically on budget, and that's pretty difficult to do with the high inflation we've seen in the construction industry of late. But also, we have a number of key capital projects that increase traffic capacity and safety, with a significant portion of these projects being funded by grants. You're seeing a lot of these along our arterial streets like Division, Cleveland, Hogan, 162nd, 181st, and then the 223rd and Stark intersection. Solid waste and sustainability. This group does not have a proposed change in the staffing level from last year. Funding for this program is generated by a fee that we impose on the city's 5 licensed haulers as they collect revenue from the activities of solid waste collection throughout the city and grants. You see the proposed operating budget There's also a designated purpose line item that goes as it's basically a pass through for Latino Network grant. Our strategic plan priorities and major initiatives for the coming year include climate action planning to reduce greenhouse gas emissions from city operations and community sources, and implementation of a new recycling program that's titled Recycle Plus. We also continue our community education and assistance to multifamily and schools and other customer classes. Infrastructure development. This program includes construction inspection services, which inspect all public infrastructure systems, development engineering services, which review and approve the design and construction plans of public infrastructure for private development projects, and land surveying services for the city's capital projects. You may not know this, but the majority of the city's public infrastructure systems get built by private development, not the city over time. You see here, oh, go ahead, that's fine. Fleet and facilities. So fleet and facilities also does not have a proposed change in the staffing level for this coming fiscal year. Funding is generated primarily by internal service charges from the other departments. You see the proposed operating and capital budgets. And really the major things coming up for the next fiscal year, continued operation and maintenance of all city-owned properties and vehicles to support staff in the community. These teams maintain the city's fire engines and also have taken over a lot of the maintenance of the yellow iron, or the big equipment that we have for operations and maintenance of a lot of the infrastructure. And they're also going through, like everybody, a lot of planning for what the city's workforce office space needs are as they continue to transition kind of to a more hybrid work environment. That's it for me, and I think I'm turning it over to Elizabeth.
All right, good evening again. I'm Elizabeth Coffey, Assistant City Manager over the Central Services area, which includes the departments that you see here on this slide. And then I'll also be covering the city's American Rescue Plan Act fund portion of the budget. So we'll start with the Budget and Finance Department. This department obviously prepares and monitors the city's budget and works with the Finance Committee throughout the year. The Budget and Finance teams handle a number of other critical functions for the city, including, just to name a few, complex financial analyses, timely collections of city revenues, payroll, purchasing, and the city and urban renewal area investment and debt portfolios. You can see here on the slide the proposed FTE count for this coming fiscal year and the proposed operating budget. The departments that I'm covering tonight are funded by internal service charges. Key issues that Budget and Finance will be tackling this coming fiscal year include the implementation of the financial roadmap that we mentioned earlier. The team plans on updating the city's financial and purchasing policies with a focus on equity. And again, as we mentioned earlier in the city manager's budget message, we anticipate saving significant staff time with the implementation of the new time tracking system. That is where that staff addition comes from. It's that 1-year limited term employee for the duration of that project. And then finally, if the Gresham Safety Levy does pass, this team will ensure that those funds are appropriately tracked and spent, and will support whatever resident oversight committee council decides to set up. Moving on to information technology. Our IT services include network systems, user support, applications management, collaborative tool sets, our mapping system, or geographical information GIS, analytics, data visualization, and business process improvement. So key issues that we'll be tackling this coming year include a tie to the city's strategic plan, really helping all of the various areas across the city develop data tracking, collection, and reporting tools so that we can report out on progress on the strategic plan. We are planning on implementing a technology roadmap that will align with the strategic plan. On the slide, you can see here the picture of the gentleman with the computer. That's one of the many projects that we have going on, which is the replacement of outdated and ineffective computers, thanks in part to our ARPA funding. We will also be expanding our business partner model. That's a theme for the central service area over the coming years. Our budget and finance team has already implemented this model, wherein a technical expert is embedded within a department, gets to learn their business processes and workflows, and serves as a bridge between the departments. So we will do have this in place for IT using ARPA funds to have a position within the police department who's helping them with their technology needs. This proposed budget includes a staff person that will continue that model within the Department of Environmental Services. We will be upgrading the Microsoft 365 license, as we noted earlier in the budget message, and then working on converting some of our older mapping solutions with more mobile-friendly solutions so that our staff can access these more easily in the field. Our city's HR team provides employee and labor relations, benefits leave administration, recruitment and retention services, training, oversight of employee policies, job classifications, and compensation practices. There are no staffing changes for this coming fiscal year. Key issues that HR will be tackling this coming year include beginning implementation of that business partner model to meet organizational needs. They will be using existing staff to kick this off. And then we will be assessing and improving our recruitment process to position Gresham as an employer of choice and to reflect the community that we serve. Finally, like many employers, as we come out of the pandemic, the city is working on improving retention of our existing employees through a number of ways, including a pay equity analysis, creating pathways to leadership, which also helps with succession planning, improving our onboarding experience for new employees, and training managers on supportive and accountable leadership. Our strategic communications services include media relations, marketing, crisis communications, brand management, graphic design, video production, photography, web communication strategy, and social media. There are no proposed changes to the staffing level in the budget. This coming fiscal year, communications will be focusing on putting a plan in place to share more financial information with the community. Continuing the implementation of a communications plan for public safety to share how police and fire are addressing community needs. They will be continuing to seek out stories and key information to promote and support our strategic priorities and projects. And then finally, they'll be ensuring that we are consistently sharing timely and accurate information across multiple platforms to be accessible for the entire community. Community engagement has a number of program goals. Two that I'd like to highlight are really to build and strengthen trust with the community and to create opportunities for inclusive and culturally relevant participation. This team also manages the Gresham Arts Festival, Spirit of Gresham, and Gresham Lilac Run events. These events rely heavily on sponsorship contributions, and in the case of the Lilac Run, 100% on sponsorship contributions. In the coming fiscal year, our community engagement team will be focusing on a number of strategic plan priorities. The first is assisting our public safety teams to develop and implement strategic engagement plans, which Corey mentioned a little bit earlier in his presentation. As resources allow, we will be continuing to either hold or support community events that nurture pride, celebrate diversity, and attract visitors. And then finally, one of our strategic plan guiding principles is authentic engagement. So we will be continuing to collaborate with our community partners to build trust in the community and provide a variety of engagement mechanisms. So moving on now to the American Rescue Plan Act, or ARPA. The purpose of these federal funds is to help communities respond to and recover to the COVID-19 pandemic. State and local governments have received these funds directly to fix budget shortfalls and invest in their communities. The city received a total of approximately $25.4 million in ARPA funds. To date, Council has allocated the funds as follows, based on community input and organizational needs. They have made a historic investment in public safety to meet critical needs for police and fire. They've also addressed needs and services for the community around housing and houselessness, youth violence prevention, parks, and trails. Funds have also been allocated towards organizational stability to address financial challenges and avoid disruptions to services. Funds have been able to offset COVID-19 expenses. And then you can see here a picture on the screen of one of our business recovery grant recipients. So thanks to the support of Council and these funds, we've been able to offer businesses support to recover from the pandemic. And we've also been able to offer community assistance grants to nonprofits that are providing direct services to the community. Council will be determining how to allocate the remaining funds over the course of the next fiscal year. The ARPA budget of approximately $18 million that you see here on the slide reflects unspent funds for projects that have already been approved. Of that $18 million, approximately $12 million has not yet been allocated, and that's what we'll be talking about with Council later this year. And with that, I will turn it over to our budget manager, Elizabeth McCann.
Good evening, Budget Committee. I am Elizabeth McCann, the city's budget manager. Tonight, I will provide you with an overview of our budget process as well as the proposed budget itself. Anyone who works closely with our budget process will tell you that it feels like a never-ending cycle. No sooner than the adoption process has been completed for 1 year, it's time to start updating forecasts and planning for the next budget year. Tonight begins phase number 4 of our cycle for 2023-24, which is your budget committee deliberations. Oregon budget law lays out mandatory steps for each phase of the budget development process. These steps are listed for the budget committee approval and city council adoption phases. Tonight you have heard the budget message. There will be an opportunity for public comment, and you will hold the state shared revenue hearing. At the conclusion of your deliberations, you will take steps to approve the proposed budget and tax rates. Council will follow up with their steps in June by holding a second state shared revenue hearing, once again taking additional public comment and adopting the budget, tax rates, and the FTE count. By the end of tonight's meeting, the proposed budget and other materials will be available on the city's website. Tomorrow, printed copies will be available for all of you. You will receive a copy of the proposed budget, internal service charge manual, finance plan manual, and an overview handout of the capital improvement program. Our budget document is lengthy. It has 10 chapters, but is grouped into 4 major sections: the budget message, revenue information, expenditure information, and additional information. The budget message section contains information from the city manager regarding the proposed budget, provides highlights of major changes in the budget, and provides an overview and status of each of the city's funds. The revenue information section walks through each of the operating funds with a review and history of major revenues in each fund. The expenditure section starts with department narratives and then is broken down into chapters by categories of funds. Each of those chapters contains summary and detailed reports regarding the expenditures of the fund and departments, as well as explanations of significant changes in each fund department combination. The additional information section includes information about staffing in the proposed budget, as well as a summary of the city's outstanding debt and proposed interfund transfers. We do have a sample here of the layout of our documents for your reference. The top page or top section of each of these pages talks about the resources of the fund. On the bottom half of the page, you have your operating requirements for the fund and the non-operating requirements. Across the top, there are 6 columns. The first 2 are actual information from the prior 2 years. The third column contains the revised budget for the current year. And then the last 3 columns document each of the 3 phases of the current year's budget process that we're considering. And if I press the arrow key the right way, you will get lovely boxes. The primary framework of the city's budget are funds. Funds are a way to track revenue and how the money is spent. Within each fund, you will find a resources section and a requirements section. By law, the resources and the requirements must be balanced in the budget. In the requirements section, you will find that it is broken down by departments and divisions to provide further tracking and management insights about how those resources are being spent. As I mentioned, resources and requirements must be balanced by law, meaning that the city can't plan to spend more money than what they already have or will bring in. Revenues are comprised of several components, resources are comprised of several components, including revenue, such as property taxes or charges for services or intergovernmental agreements. These revenues can be ongoing, meaning that the city expects to receive them every year, or they can be one-time, such as grants. The City of Gresham primarily receives a different mix of ongoing and one-time revenues in each fund. Another component of resources is beginning balance. This is the estimate of how much cash each fund will have at the beginning of the year. On the requirement side, there are operating expenditures, such as personnel or supplies, and non-operating expenditures, such as debt service. These are grouped in the funds by departments, such as police or fire. Contingency and unappropriated have specific definitions under budget law, but combined together are more commonly known as ending fund balance. Ending fund balance is a very important component of each fund because it is the money set aside for future use. Every fund must have a certain level of ending fund balance to serve as working capital. For example, in the general fund, there is no significant revenue that arrives until it arrives each November, but the expenses start on July 1st. So this fund balance makes sure that the fund can pay all of its bills until the revenue starts coming in for the year. Ending fund balance can also be used to save for future large one-time expenditures used in the case of emergencies, or can be used to fund ongoing operations. Since new ending fund balance is created only by underspending your resources, it should be considered as a one-time resource, and careful consideration should be taken when using it to fund ongoing resource or ongoing expenses. The city has 37 active funds, and it's reasonable to ask why so many. Funds are used when revenue comes with restrictions or there are special reporting requirements. This provides a way to ensure that resources are only used for eligible purposes. For example, charges for water service can only be used to maintain and operate the water system. So there is a water fund. This year, the proposed budget has a new fund, the Local Option Levy Fund. This will allow the city to demonstrate that property taxes from the levy are being spent consistently with the ballot measure. Having separate funds allows for better reporting, transparency, and management, since the fund provides automatic segregation and tracking, which makes it easier to see how the program is performing. Much of the money that the city receives can only be used for a very specific purpose. For example, grant funding is typically tied to a particular project or program. Gas taxes are limited by state statute, and the water utility rate revenue is dedicated to those particular functions. It is not allowable to take resources from one fund or program and pay for the expenses of another unrelated program. Another way our budget data is often grouped is by department. Shown here, back on our funds. With having 37 different funds, it is important to talk about groups of like funds. And so for budgeting purposes, we have used the 6 groupings that you see on the screen. Now, another way we group our data is by department. On this screen are the city's operating departments. One note is that the city's management and reporting structure does not always align perfectly with the city's budget structure, but that's okay. The organization of the city can be reorganized as needed, but the budget structure is fixed for the year and often lags behind any organizational changes. Departments can be mixed and matched with different funds in a matrix style arrangement to accurately group the expenditures across the city. This year's proposed budget totals $818.7 million with an operating budget of $283.3 million. As is noted in the budget highlights and comparison section of the budget document that you will receive later, after adjusting for duplications and certain grants or pass-through items, the operating budget increased 7.25% from the fiscal year 22-23 revised budget. The next few slides will provide a high-level summary of each fund group. In your document, each fund will have additional details that can be found in the grouping chapters. The general fund is the city's primary operating fund. Major revenues include property taxes, utility license fees, and revenue shared from the county for the business income tax. In total, the general fund expects to receive approximately $84.7 million in 23-24. More details about the individual revenue sources can be found in the revenue chapter of the budget document. This is a graph of the general fund forecast, very similar to the one presented to council in January. It has just been updated for the 3 months since that time. This shows the outlook for the general fund combined with the local option levy fund. And this assumes that the local option levy fund or the ballot measure will pass and that the financial roadmap is implemented as adopted. As with any forecast, assumptions can change, and the forecast is then updated as new information becomes available. The general fund as a whole is the city's largest operating fund and has the budgets of police, fire, as well as parks and programs in economic development and community livability. Police and fire services make up the majority of the city's general fund at about approximately 90% of this fund. That also means that the primary expenditures of this fund are personnel related. The general fund also includes related expenses for public safety, such as the emergency dispatch services and needed equipment purchases. One item to note, the planning services are budgeted in urban design and planning, but they are partially supported by an interfund transfer from the general fund. While property taxes make up about 46% of the general fund revenue, they only cover about 40% of police and fire expenses. Even with the addition of taxes received from the local option levy, it will still only cover about 54% of the police and fire expenses. The difference is made up from the other general fund resources, such as the business income tax, utility license fees, or service contracts that those departments have with other jurisdictions. The transient lodging tax is an important component of the general fund revenue mix. Per Oregon revised statutes, a portion of this revenue must be dedicated to tourism-related activities. For fiscal year 23-24, the city plans to first off, increase the contribution to the Gresham Area Chamber of Commerce to $100,000, matching previous levels, and also support the Gresham Arts Festival by providing staff and other materials and services. The fiscal year 23-24 budget assumes that the local option levy measure on the May ballot will pass. These property taxes will be put in a separate and restricted fund to ensure that the funds are spent appropriately in accordance with the ballot measure. In the proposed budget document, we have shown a combined view of the general fund and the local option levy fund to provide an easy way to compare police and fire department budgets year over year. But then we have also provided individual reports for each fund. For 23-24, the levy fund includes up to 34 existing and 9 new police positions, 21 existing and 16 new fire positions, and 1 new and 1 temporary and retaining 1 temporarily funded homeless services position. On to the next group of funds, which are our business funds. These are specialized programs with the intent of being mostly or entirely self-supporting through the fees that they collect. As a whole, the business funds have a proposed operating budget that primarily consists of personnel expenses. As previously mentioned, urban design and planning is also supported by the general fund for comprehensive planning services. In particular, these funds are aligned closely with economic cycles, and revenues can fluctuate significantly over time, particularly for the urban design and planning and building funds. For urban renewal, the Gresham Redevelopment Commission contracts with the city for its operations. Outside of capital and debt service activity, the Urban Renewal Support Fund contains all the operating activities of urban renewal. For the infrastructure funds, these account for activities related to the large city-owned systems, such as roads or water systems. These funds have primary expenses that tend to be related to the facilities themselves as opposed to personnel. Unlike most of the other operating funds in the city, personnel costs are not the primary expense driver here. In financial planning and forecasting for these funds, it is important to be very long-term focused. The infrastructure may last for 50 to 75 years in some cases, and it is critical to make sure that it is maintained and replaced as needed. Central support funds contain internal services that provide support to the services that we previously mentioned. These are the internal business workings of the city, including city manager's office, HR, budget and finance, fleet maintenance, or information technology, as an example. The primary expenses for these funds tend to be personnel related, but specific programs can also have substantial materials and services expenditures, such as parts and fuel for fleet maintenance or software costs for IT. The primary expenses for the health and dental and workers' comp and liability funds is related to claims and insurance premiums, while the primary expenses for equipment replacement fund is related to vehicle and equipment purchases. In one of the documents that you receive, which is the internal service charge manual, you will find more information about all of these funds and how the charges are allocated to operating departments. For our capital funds, we have two different types of capital funds. The first type, which includes most of these, are represented in the city's 5-year capital improvement program. And these funds allow for the tracking of large infrastructure construction projects, such as the street reconstruction project or the groundwater project that Steve referenced earlier this evening. The 5-year CIP is updated annually and is closely coordinated with the budget process. There are no general fund dollars used within the CIP funds at this time. The second type of capital fund is not captured in the CIP, but includes the city facility and enterprise system replacement funds. These funds are used to track large capital or replacement projects related to facilities and IT. And we are in the last grouping. So we now have our special revenue and non-operating funds. For special revenue, there are two funds. One is the designated purpose, which contains programs such as the American Rescue Plan Act funding and the Metro Housing Bond funding. The other special revenue fund that we have is our CDBG Home Fund, which contains all of our federal allocations for those programs. The non-operating portion of that is related to our debt service funds, which serve as a clearinghouse for debt payments. We handle those in separate funds in order to better account for debt payments and assure that we are meeting all our bond covenant and other associated requirements. This slide contains a history of our budgeted staffing levels. The brown bar in these graphs represent the ARPA funding and those, or sorry, the ARPA positions. And the green bar in the 23-24 column represents the new positions being funded by the levy. So with that, I'm going to conclude my portion of the presentation this evening, and I'm going to now turn it back over to Chair Leiter.
Thank you. We will now move on to the state shared revenue hearing. This public hearing is to comply with ORS 221.770. The hearing is to allow comment regarding the use of state shared revenue in Gresham's 23-24 budget. Holding the hearing is required in order for the city to participate in the distribution of state shared revenue. The proposed use of the state shared revenue is to receive $3,888,000 into the general fund in support of services provided to the community. The public hearing is now open to receive comment from persons who signed up to provide testimony on the proposed use of state shared revenue in the fiscal year 23-24. Do we have members of the community who have signed up to testify specifically on the proposed use of the state shared revenue?
We do not, Chair.
Thank you. As no requests were received to submit comments specific to the state shared revenue hearing, the hearing will now be continued or closed. Please raise your hand if you wish to close the hearing. Thank you. There is a consensus, so the hearing is now closed. That concludes the required budget committee step regarding the receipt of the state shared revenue. All right, and then I'll have you make sure your hands are down if you have a moment, unless you would like to chime in. Thank you. We will now move to the agenda item for community comment on the proposed budget for fiscal year 23-24. Individuals were provided options to sign up for oral or written testimony 24 hours prior to the meeting. Do we have members of the community who signed up to testify?
We do not this evening. Thank you.
Okay, thank you. So we will close this portion of the agenda item. Thank you. We will now open the meeting up for committee discussion. Are there budget committee members who have comments or questions regarding topics presented tonight? Give you one more moment. I'm not seeing any. All right, thank you. I am not seeing any. So we will move on to item number 9, which is recess until Thursday, April 27th, 2023. At this time, the committee is scheduled to recess until next week. Before we do, is there any additional information staff needs to provide to the committee?
Thanks, Chair. Just wanted to, a couple things with the committee. One, as mentioned, your printed materials will be available at City Hall tomorrow. If for some reason you are not able to make it to City Hall to pick those up, please let either Elizabeth McCann or myself know, and we will work out some alternate arrangements to get those materials to you. I know things will be posted online, but certainly with something that has as much information in it as these documents, hard copies are probably much easier to work with. So if you have any challenges picking those materials up, please don't hesitate to reach out and we'll work something out for you. As you start reviewing materials, if you have questions that you want to send ahead of time, ahead of next Thursday's meeting, again, if you could please send those either to Elizabeth McCann or to myself. That will allow us time to coordinate responses and ensure that all of the information is provided to everybody. And of course, that will also help avoid discussing details or questions amongst yourselves to ensure that we aren't getting crosswise with any public meeting requirements. And I see Teresa has a hand up, so I'll pause for a moment there.
My question is, what time tomorrow will the documents be available?
I'll let Elizabeth confirm, but I would say after the building opens up at 8 a.m.
Correct.
Thank you so much. I appreciate that.
Those are the main things I wanted to make sure. If you have questions that are more just like, where would I find this in the document, that aren't really content questions or policy questions, certainly don't hesitate to reach out. Happy to answer any of those and to guide you through where materials may be found in the document as well. I know there's a lot in there. I'm reminded every time I listen to this kind of presentation, just the amazing breadth and depth of subjects that the city collectively works on. So definitely there's a lot of information to get yourself through. So happy to try to assist in any way that we can.
Right. Thank you, Sharon. Is there any other staff comments at this time? All right, seeing none, I will thank staff for the presentation this evening. It was very well laid out for us, and we look forward to seeing the budget document tomorrow. With that being said, do I have a motion to recess the fiscal year 23-24 budget committee meeting until 6 p.m. on Thursday, April 27th, 2023?
So moved.
Thank you, Mayor Stovall. And do I have a second?
I'll second it. Rusty.
Thank you. We have a motion by Mayor Stovall that was seconded by Rusty Allen to recess the Budget Committee meeting for the fiscal year 23-24 until Thursday, April 27th, 2023. Is there any discussion on the motion? Seeing none, all in favor, please say aye, or you may raise your hand. Thank you. And any opposed, say nay or raise your hand. I see everyone in favor. So the motion to recess the proposed budget meeting for fiscal 23-24 until Thursday, April 27th, 2023 passes. The meeting is now recessed until 6 p.m. on Thursday, April 27th, 2023.
Thank you all very much.
Thank you, everybody. Have a good night.
Thank you. Good night.
You.